The decisive step comes from Ukraine. The most important headquarters of the Russian army was captured by Ukraine. With this blow from the Russian army, the Ukrainian army has taken a very serious lead. However, the Ukrainian army has now gained a huge advantage over Russia. When this headquarters in Zaporizhia was captured, Putin went crazy with rage. In the final days of the Russo-Ukrainian War, Putin was severely cornered. One of the main reasons for this is developments in Ukraine, especially in the intelligence field. The Russian military has no answer for this. Therefore, it has become a matter of time before Ukraine expands and consolidates its dominant position in the region. But this latest blow by the Russian army has caused repercussions around the world. The Russian army stores its most important ammunition and weapons in certain important headquarters. These are particularly evident in Zaporozhye, one of the central regions. Russian soldiers in Zaporozhye believed that Putin would protect the place because he knew how important these commands were. But Ukraine's intelligence-gathering process over time shows that Putin does not attribute the necessary value to the region. The Ukrainian army decided to take advantage of this situation and take action. The soldiers at the headquarters were unaware of the security vulnerabilities in the area and moved very freely. But mainly because the theater of war was transferred to Bakhmut, Russia did not care about the headquarters in Zaporozhye. Since then, with the coup in Ukraine, things have completely developed in a direction favorable to Ukraine. The Ukrainian military has begun targeting the region with its main weapons and ammunition to take advantage of the many advantages it has gained. Subsequently, the Ukrainian army took steps to exploit the many advantages gained. To carry out this critical mission, Ukraine has deployed Bayraktar drones, the primary airstrike vehicle in Ukraine's inventory, at a nearby airfield. Following this step, Ukraine has moved its deployed HIMARS closer to the area, putting them within range. The most important reason why the Ukrainian army is so willing to provide support for this operation is that Russia has sent a large amount of weapons and ammunition to various places from this region. The Ukrainian army has mobilized one of its most elite teams and sent it here. This is what this unit, known as the Ukrainian Special Forces, is a Russian soldier's terrifying dream. Realizing this, the Ukrainian army first began mapping the main routes into the area. This route would change the fate of the war. Then the Ukrainian army gave the Russian army the heaviest blow. With Russian forces so weak in the area, Ukrainian forces took action. After Ukrainian soldiers learned of the change of guard at Zaporozhye's military headquarters, they took up positions to blockade the headquarters. They began firing rockets at the Russian army's walls. What happened next took the Russian military by surprise. However, Ukrainian soldiers struggled to break through the Russian troops. Realizing they were blocked, the Russians took completely different steps this time. The intelligence information reaching Ukraine turned out to be completely untrue. The Russian military has actually anticipated operations in the area. To this end, the Ukrainian military's response has put the Ukrainian military in a difficult position. After further clashes with Russian soldiers, Ukrainian troops decided to withdraw. But in fact, this retreat ensures the realization of this unimaginable plan. As Ukrainian troops began to withdraw from the area, they were pursued by Russian soldiers. Subsequently, Ukrainian troops decided to deploy to the region to fight the conflict. But at that point, when the signal was sent to HIMARS and the Bayraktars, the Russian troops were literally cornered. The Bayraktar people who came to this area caused the headquarters to be shelled. Since then, thanks to HIMARS missile support, the Ukrainian army has been close to victory. The Russian soldiers were surprised when they saw the headquarters they left behind explode. A group of soldiers were shocked when they saw this and decided to simply drop their weapons. Ukrainian troops subsequently captured the group. Only a small portion of the Russian army continued to fight, while the rest began to flee toward the Russian positions. After eliminating the Russians fighting in the area, the Ukrainian army set out for Ukraine and took prisoners. But after that, Putin's decision had a huge impact around the world. Putin has been furious about his recent defeat in Ukraine, but with his latest defeat, he's completely out of control. Putin, who blamed the defeat of the Ukrainian army on successive victories supported by various countries, began to make a series of remarks based on threats to the whole world. But Putin, who threatens so many countries, faces a very big problem. This ensures that support is not withdrawn, as Putin expected, but continues to be sent. It is worth noting that this move will further weaken the quality of the Russian army while deepening the deadlock that Putin has already entered. At this time, the United States took the first step. The United States has had a quieter policy on fighter jets, but now says it is possible. But after that, England's move changed everything. Britain has withdrawn a large number of troops from Ukraine and begun training F-16s. This was actually interpreted as a sign that the Ukrainian military might acquire fighter jets in the near future. Ukrainian soldiers then took more decisive action. But the measures taken by the United States in this regard have begun to seriously worry Russia. The United States surrendered at the beginning of the war. His decision to abandon the far-reaching patriot cause he called World War II. After making this decision, Putin faced a very big problem in Moscow. This development affected Putin's actions in the region, allowing him to install air defense systems across Moscow. The Ukrainian army then took completely different steps. These developments once again show how beneficial war is to Ukraine. But the words of war analysts on this issue have caused great tension around the world. In particular, the Kremlin does not accept these claims. War analysts believe these latest Russian moves are related to heightened fear. At the core is Putin's fear. Putin faced great difficulties during his time in power and committed many crimes and war crimes. Therefore, some say it is only a matter of time before Putin is brought to justice if he steps down. This is actually an issue that explains Putin's insistence on war. If Putin loses the war, he will also lose power. Not only in this area, Putin now faces a very tense situation, and Putin is left alone to deal with the violent reaction of the Russian people. Although an economic crisis was unavoidable in this case, nearly a year had passed since the outbreak of the war, and Putin was not ready to accept even the slightest responsibility. Given the success of the Ukrainian military in many areas, it succeeded in cornering the Russian military. Moreover, due to Putin's wrong policies, which resulted in many enemies, the Ukrainian army received strong support. It is with such support that while the ammunition and equipment in their hands are being modernized, the situation of Ukrainian soldiers has become worse, and the situation of the Russian army has become even worse. Ukrainian troops have begun operations in many areas. However, it can be said that the Ukrainian army has gained a huge advantage over Russia, especially thanks to the achievements in recent days and the strong support for its equipment. As this advantage solidifies and develops over time, the Ukrainian army can advance this transformation to another stage. This could shift the blow to the Russian military in an entirely different direction. But no matter what happens, if the Ukrainian military exploits the advantage gained, Putin will lose power. This will allow Russia to deal with a very big crisis. The Ukrainian army carried out such an operation, making all Putin's plans fail. The Russian S-400 air defense system was destroyed by the Ukrainian army. The Russian Navy off the coast of Odessa experienced a nightmare. The S-400 used to protect Russian ships cannot withstand the HIMARS missiles of the Ukrainian army. In the final days of the Russo-Ukrainian War, the Russian army basically rested. The Russian army, which occupied many territories in Ukraine at the beginning of the war, was basically repelled under pressure from the Ukrainian army recently. The most important thing is that the package support of the Ukrainian army from the United States and other Western countries changed the fate of the war, so much so that the roles in the war have now completely changed. The Russian army, which was mainly offensive in the early stages of the war, was forced to switch to defense. The increasingly modernized Ukrainian army has become a terrible dream for the Russian occupying forces. Thanks to the latest U.S. missile systems, Ukrainian forces are now able to conduct multiple airstrikes. Alarmed by these actions in Ukraine, Putin ordered the deployment of massive air defense systems on the Crimean Peninsula and the port of Odessa, where the occupation continues. Another reason is that Putin is preparing new invasion plans. Putin hopes to end the poor practice of Russian troops suffering heavy losses in ground operations on Ukrainian soil, and hopes to organize a new wave of naval attacks on Ukraine. It was decided to send the Russian fleet from the port of Sevastopol to Odessa, where the majority of the Russian Navy's ships were located. The deciphering of Putin's plan, according to which 8 Russian cruisers had to leave Sevastopol and launch a massive operation on the Dnieper via the port of Odessa, changed everything. As soon as Israeli intelligence received word that the Russian Navy had left Sevastopol and was heading towards Odessa, the Ukrainian army began full preparations. However, Vladimir Putin decided to send 2 S-400 air defense systems to the port of Odessa to prevent possible Ukrainian airstrikes. Recently, the Russian Navy has suffered serious setbacks due to airstrikes by the Ukrainian army. Since the war began, Ukrainian forces have destroyed 8 Russian cruisers using Bayraktar TB2 drones and HIMARS missile systems, causing billions of dollars in damage to Putin. Putin does not want to suffer the same fate in this operation and believes that Ukraine can prevent the airstrike by deploying 2 S-400 air defense systems in the port of Odessa. But the fact that Ukrainian intelligence agents in Crimea discovered the shipment changed everything. After learning that the S-400 was delivered at the Kerch Bridge, the only road between Russia and Crimea, the Ukrainian military immediately changed its plan and prioritized destroying these air defense systems. The Ukrainian army is making plans for the operation to transport HIMARS missiles stationed in the city of Dnipro from near Odessa to the Kryvyi Rog region. The Ukrainian army deployed HIMARS missiles at appropriate locations, with a range from the area to the port of Odessa, and decided to organize a drone reconnaissance flight. This allowed the Ukrainian army to determine the route of the Russian convoy to Odessa, and the Russian army took action immediately after delivering the goods to the Odessa area. The Russian soldiers entering the port of Odessa were so surprised that they tried to place the S-400 in the right position without wasting any time. Noticing the mobility of Russian soldiers in the port of Odessa, the Ukrainian army handed over command to HIMARS missiles, which were preloaded with the coordinates of the port. 6 HIMARS missiles launched from the city of Kryvyi Rog have begun moving towards the S-400, which is still in the preparation stage. All progress of this process is monitored by Ukrainian drones. When HIMARS missiles hit the S-400 one after another, a big explosion occurred. Faced with this sudden attack, Russian soldiers in the area were surprised at what they suffered. The Russian commander in charge of the area ordered the evacuation of all soldiers. The S-400 air defense system that Putin praised to the world was destroyed by a Ukrainian attack before it could be put into use. Russian leader Vladimir Putin was furious when he heard about the development, which has major global implications. 8 Russian cruisers sailing from the port of Sevastopol to Odessa were also ordered to evacuate immediately. However, the Ukrainian army achieved 2 decisive victories with this overwhelming operation. Both the Ukrainian and Russian military's main air defense systems, which were used to thwart a planned Russian attack on the port of Odessa, were disabled. Putin, who suffered billions of dollars in losses, was unable to implement any of his plans. As a result of these developments, the Russian occupying forces are effectively cornered on Ukrainian territory. The Russian army, which carried out a series of airstrikes in the early days of the war, is now experiencing the nightmare of Ukrainian airstrikes. The Ukrainian army, which did not have adequate air defense systems in the first months of the war, was prepared for any actions by the Russian Air Force with the help of the Patriot long-range missile system deployed by the United States. However, the United States was not satisfied with this support and ensured that the balance of the war was entirely in Ukraine's favor by sending the HIMARS missile system to Ukraine. Thanks to this support, the HIMARS missiles in the hands of the Ukrainian army inflicted a very heavy blow on the Russian occupying forces on Ukrainian territory, with a range of 500 km on the Russian border. Ukraine is now able to conduct cross-border operations, which makes Putin very nervous. In many areas of Russia, especially on the roofs of government buildings in the capital Moscow, the Pantsir S-1 air defense system is installed. This situation makes the Russian people very worried. Russian citizens are beginning to react to Putin's failure to secure borders. In this process, the statement of Ukrainian head of state Zelensky caused huge repercussions around the world. Zelensky explained to Russian soldiers that air operations were limited to areas where Russian troops were concentrated. Zelensky said that all Russian soldiers who want to lay down their weapons and leave the war can surrender to the Ukrainian army without being harmed. Russian President Vladimir Putin is the only person responsible for this war. The remarks were reminiscent of previous confessions by Russian soldiers who surrendered to Ukrainian forces. Many Russian soldiers who have surrendered to Ukrainian forces in the past say conditions as a prisoner in Ukraine were much more comfortable than as a soldier in the Russian army. After these comments caused a stir on social media around the world, especially in Russia, the number of Russian soldiers surrendering to Ukraine began to increase daily. Another reason why so many soldiers are leaving the Russian army is Russian leader Vladimir Putin's decision to partially mobilize. In the final months of the war, Putin forcibly conscripted 300 Russian citizens into the army and decided to increase the number of soldiers in the Russian army, which had major personnel problems, to the level he wanted through partial mobilization. But everything is made worse by the fact that these inexperienced Russian soldiers with no combat experience are being sent into areas of intense conflict in Ukraine without regard for their own lives. The Russian army, which has suffered successive defeats, has lost more than 250,000 soldiers since the war began. During this process, 200,000 of the 300,000 Russian soldiers who decided to enlist through mobilization were sent to Ukraine. However, with recent developments, these soldiers could no longer withstand Putin's pressure and mismanagement and began surrendering to Ukrainian forces. Comments by war analysts on these developments triggered a very big crisis in the Kremlin and shocked everyone. War analysts said that this personnel problem of the Russian army is a huge opportunity for the Ukrainian army. In addition, the Russian army stopped all operations on Ukrainian territory after losing its most important weapons and equipment. War analysts predict that if the Ukrainian army can assess this process well, it will soon win the war. Ukrainian Army Caribbean 11. He completely destroyed the unified army. Thanks to the strict and decisive actions of the Ukrainian army, this 12,000-strong force sent to Ukrainian territory by Vladimir Putin was completely suppressed. Kaliningrad, number 11. The regiment is considered one of the most elite and powerful units in the Russian army. However, due to successful operations in Ukraine, the combat capability of this force was almost eliminated. The 11th Kaliningrad Infantry Division has been stationed on Ukrainian territory since the beginning of the war. His legions are now history. The war between Ukraine and Russia hit the world agenda like a bomb and marked a new and dramatic turning point. Ukrainian Army, Kaliningrad on the 11th. Any military assets in the 12,000-strong contingent that Putin sent to Ukrainian territory were effectively destroyed. This incident greatly affected the course of the war and the strategic balance. We have seen that the strategic planning and determination of the Ukrainian army have produced effective results. Kaliningrad, 11. Legion Task Force is one of the main military forces sent by Putin to areas controlled by Ukraine. However, the Ukrainian army used its reconnaissance capabilities and field superiority to suppress this force. After a full-scale military conflict and fierce clashes, the existence of the 11th Army in Kaliningrad came to an end. The impact of this incident was not only at the military level, but also had a significant impact internationally. This victory of the Ukrainian army increased Ukraine's support and prestige in the international community. At the same time, this has further heightened global concerns about the consequences of Putin's aggressive military policies. The occupation of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson regions by Russian troops in the first months of the war was the basis of Vladimir Putin's strategic plan. These areas are extremely important to Putin, and he wants to bring them under his control as soon as possible. Immediately after this invasion, Putin announced the annexation of these areas through an illegally organized referendum. However, this annexation was not recognized internationally, nor by the United States and Western countries. Nonetheless, Putin announced that he now accepts these areas as Russian territory. Ukrainian President Zelensky announced that efforts to liberate these occupied territories will continue and special military operations are planned. Zelensky's comments have reinforced Putin's determination to maintain his dominance in these regions. To this end, soldiers designated as the 11th Army Corps in Kaliningrad, which had also previously participated in the occupation of Crimea, were sent to these areas. The force attempts to maintain Russian dominance by establishing extensive defense lines to protect these areas. However, due to a mistake by Russian Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov, Kaliningrad became the 11th Army, and as a result, the army no longer exists. Gerasimov accidentally revealed this information, thereby revealing that the Union no longer existed. Russian leader Vladimir Putin dispatched a Kaliningrad contingent to the annexed territory on Ukrainian soil, prompting a statement from Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov. Reznikov made it clear that no force can prevent Ukrainian forces from retaking these areas. Shortly after these announcements, Ukrainian troops launched large-scale operations in the Zaporozhye and Donetsk regions. During an intensification of the conflict on the Bakhmut front, Ukrainian troops launched an offensive to repel Russian forces. He organized a strategic operation in cooperation with Ukrainian commanders on the Bakhmut front. Ukrainian troops stationed in the town of Lyman attempted to dislodge Russian troops by advancing toward the Bakhmut front. After a protracted battle, the Ukrainian army reached the Bakhmut front line. Meanwhile, in Kaliningrad was the 11th Army. The soldiers of the regiment realized that Ukrainian troops were approaching behind them and had to move into defensive positions. The Ukrainian army quickly launched an offensive and blocked a large force in Kaliningrad. After several days of fighting, the Russian army leaders realized that they could not withstand the Ukrainian army's offensive and decided to withdraw their troops. The commander of the Ukrainian army, which successfully repelled the Russian army, said in a statement that the incident resulted in the repulsion of 182 Russian soldiers and that many Russian soldiers had withdrawn from Bakhmut. However, Russian Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov made more interesting remarks. Gerasimov acknowledged that Russian troops were forced to retreat during clashes on the Bakhmut front and expressed condolences to the families of the Kaliningrad federal soldiers who died. Gerasimov also announced that the last soldier of the Kaliningrad alliance was also killed in Bakhmut and announced that the alliance was closed. However, Gerasimov's statement was made by a general of the 11th Army serving in Ukraine. He said he did not know the actual number of the regiment, which was 12,000 soldiers. Gerasimov's mistake clearly shows that 12,000 Russian soldiers were killed in operations on Ukrainian territory. Russian leader Vladimir Putin is known for concealing the number of Russian soldiers killed on Ukrainian soil, stressing that the matter was a state secret. However, through Gerasimov's mistakes, the truth about the deaths of 12,000 soldiers was revealed. While Ukrainian government officials regularly update and publish the number of Russian and Ukrainian soldiers killed on Ukrainian soil, Vladimir Putin appears to have avoided revealing these figures. Ukraine announced that the Russian army has lost more than 200,000 soldiers since the outbreak of the war. However, the Russian government does not accept these figures and often even questions the accuracy of these losses. One of the main reasons Vladimir Putin has avoided deciphering these losses is that the information unsettles the Russian people. There is also a group of Russian citizens who have been protesting against the occupation of Ukraine since the war began. These protesters believed that Vladimir Putin's government would jeopardize Russia's future and adopted an anti-war stance. To this end, anti-war demonstrations calling for an end to the war are often held in many Russian cities. The group expressed criticism of the policies of the Putin regime, questioning the government's policies by expressing the human toll and possible negative consequences of the war. The recent protests in Russia have aroused Putin's attention and concern. The opposition within Russia is trying to seize this opportunity to win the support of the Russian people. In particular, Alexei Navalny, the Russian dissident allegedly imprisoned by Putin, is one of the key figures trying to win over the Russian people. Navalny has received long-term treatment for poisonings in the past and is considered one of Putin's opponents. For this reason, it is generally believed that Navalny was poisoned to death by Putin. Navalny, who is currently serving a sentence in prison, called on the Russian people to resist Putin's regime. Navalny stressed that the Russian people are brave and determined, and they should take to the streets to end this war. Navalny called on all Russian citizens to take to the streets and lamented the need to unite to end Putin's regime. Putin's growing authoritarianism has recently increased his fear of his own people. Navalny's appeal continues to mobilize people against Putin's rule and make their voices heard. Even some Russian citizens who supported the occupation of Ukrainian territory at the beginning of the war now want the process to end. The economic situation in Russia continues to deteriorate, and inflation is increasing rapidly, which has exceeded the capacity of the Russian people. The Russia-Ukraine war has made great progress. Ukrainian troops destroyed a Russian naval ship in Crimea. The port of Sevastopol is on fire. Ukraine carried out air operations against the port of Sevastopol, which houses Russia's largest Black Sea fleet, in a bid to restore its naval superiority in the Black Sea. After this thrilling action, the balance of the Black Sea has fundamentally changed. Russian President Vladimir Putin discussed the dramatic development at an emergency meeting in the Kremlin. The Azuri waders of the Black Sea tell the story of a turbulent era. The destruction of a Russian naval ship and the operation in the port of Sevastopol, home to Russia's largest Black Sea fleet, was a dramatic event that disrupted the regional and international security balance. This development represents a turning point, marked by Ukraine's bold move, and has a major impact on the global political stage. It appears that Russia has been swayed by the strategic planning and courage of the Ukrainian military. The destruction of the Russian Navy ship shows how determined Ukraine is to confront maritime threats. The destruction of Russian naval vessels in the Black Sea demonstrates Ukraine's maritime power and military capabilities. The incident dates back to 2014 and was behind Vladimir Putin's annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. But Crimea not only became an annexed area, but also became one of the strategic coordination centers for the Russian army. Putin transports much of the ammunition and equipment he sends to support his military presence in Ukraine through Crimea. To this end, the Ukrainian army launched a large-scale operation to find solutions to Putin's tactics. Recently, the Ukrainian army has carried out effective operations to weaken Putin's strategic power in Crimea. In recent weeks, Ukrainian forces destroyed a Russian ammunition depot. Now comes a striking development. Ukrainian troops destroyed a Russian naval ship in the Crimean port of Sevastopol. With strong intelligence support from the Israeli agent Mossad, Ukrainian forces achieved two major victories. Mossad's discovery of the location of secret ammunition depots in Crimea initially enabled Ukrainian forces to operate effectively. Israeli intelligence has determined that Russia is preparing to send new munitions to Ukraine. To this end, Mossad organized a drone reconnaissance flight over the Black Sea and discovered a secret ammunition depot in an abandoned factory in Simferopol. When Israeli authorities realized security had been tightened around the factory, they realized it was an ammunition depot. The Ukrainian army quickly decided to take action to eliminate this secret ammunition depot. The aerial operation launched by the Bayraktar unmanned combat aircraft was very successful. The Bayraktars were able to bypass the radar of Russian air defense systems and fly at high altitudes, successfully penetrating Crimean airspace. Drones arriving in the city of Simferopol carried out a missile attack on a secret ammunition depot of the Russian army. The operation caused significant damage to the ammunition depot. The impact of the explosion was so powerful that it could be heard miles away. While the Russian soldiers were stunned by the ammunition explosion, the drone successfully completed the operation and returned home. Weeks after this important operation, Ukrainian forces achieved another major success, destroying a Russian naval ship in the port of Sevastopol. Russian head of state. Vladimir Putin pointed out that the Russian armed forces stationed in Ukraine are increasingly weak. In view of this situation, he planned to organize an attack on the Ukrainian armed forces from the sea. As a strategic move, Russian naval ships departing from the Odessa region sailed towards the Ukrainian coast, eventually arriving at the port of Sevastopol. The ships completed preparations for fuel and ammunition here. The Russian Navy continues to advance towards the Sea of Azov, hoping to attack the coastal forces of the Ukrainian army.